There are 3 repair bills lying on my workbench this morning. One came off a BMW, one off an Audi, one off a Mercedes, and every one of those owners asked me the same question before they paid. They wanted to know which badge they should have bought instead. I am going to pick these up one at a time. And the badge on the bonnet wrote none of these numbers. The model year wrote them, the engine code wrote them, and the one line on the service sheet that the last owner trusted, the line that says lifetime, wrote the largest figure of the 3. So we are not going to settle the badge argument today, the one the showroom wants you to have, where you stand there deciding which crest looks the most expensive. We are going to settle the real one. Which of these 3 is cheapest to keep alive past 200,000 kilometers, and which one quietly cooks itself while the owner trusts a sticker? That is a different question, and almost nobody asks it out loud. But the showroom has every reason to keep you asking the wrong one. I spent more years than I will admit, standing on the other side of a service counter, reading these invoices to good people and watching them pay. I earned the Meister title on these cars. I also wrote the long life interval off the screen myself and told owners their fluid was sealed for the life of the car, because that is what the maker said, and that is what the job was. Then I watched those same gearboxes get notchy and die at 140,000 kilometers, and I understood far too late that I had been the man selling the sticker. So here is what I can do that the showroom cannot. I can read you all 3 of these bills, line by line, with nothing to sell you on the engine itself, and at the end I will tell you the one I would put my own money on. Not the one with the best badge, the one with the smallest bill at 300,000 kilometers. And the strangest part is that the answer is the same word for all 3 makes, and it is not a brand at all. Start with the same factory that makes the Legend, a Mercedes taxi in Thessaloniki, a 1976 240 diesel driven by a man named Gregorios Sakinidis, crossed 4.5 million kilometers on its original engine, and Mercedes took the car for its own museum. 4.5 million. The engine was never opened. Now look at the bill on my bench from a Mercedes built 30 years later, and it is a gearbox conductor plate and a balance gear made of a metal the maker quietly changed. Same badge, same factory. One of those cars is a monument and the other is a warning, and the difference between them is not the 3-pointed star. It is the era and the design philosophy, and you can read it in the engine code. Here is the cleanest proof I have that the interval is the real villain, not the badge. In December of 2014, BMW released a service bulletin number B001314 on one of its V8 engines. Nothing about the metal in that engine changed that day, only the page changed. The bulletin shortened the recommended service interval to roughly half of the long life number the company had been selling for years. The maker had spent a decade calling the long interval progress, and then, in one bulletin, it admitted in plain numbers what every mechanic on the floor already knew. The interval was the problem. Hold that date. We come back to it when we read the BMW bill. And before I open the first invoice, one promise, because I wrote the whole of this down. Which engines outlive the car, which ones die on a schedule the trade always knew about, and the real intervals that decide which is which. It is in a set of guides over at fritz.commonguides.com, and I will tell you exactly how to put it in your hands near the end. Right now, the bills. We start with the BMW because it is the one most owners read exactly wrong. So let me read you the BMW bill, and let me be fair to it, because fair is the only way this is worth anything. I will give you the worst of this make and the best of it, and the order matters. The worst first. This particular bill came off a turbo 4-cylinder, the engine code that lived in a lot of 3 Series and 5 Series cars from roughly 2011 to 2015. The headline failure is the timing chain guide. The chain itself is steel and it is fine. The guide that holds it is a plastic part, and on the early run of these engines the plastic embrittles, the chain starts to slap, and if you ignore it, the chain stretches and the engine can destroy itself. BMW thought enough of the problem to extend the chain warranty to 7 years or 70,000 miles. The class action that followed alleged repairs so severe, they meant replacing the engine. I am not going to quote you a single dollar figure on that. What the lawsuit alleged and what a real invoice reads are 2 different things. The honest answer is a range that depends on the shop, the region, and how long the owner ignored the noise. Listen at the cold start. A chain that rattles for more than a second or 2 before the oil pressure comes up is the tensioner telling you it has not been fed yet, and that rattle is far cheaper to chase than the stretch. And whatever the part is, verify the specific guide and tensioner against your own VIN, because BMW ran more than one version. Then there is the bigger engine on this same make, the twin-turbo V8 from that 2008 to 2013 window. This is the one the December 2014 bulletin was written for. It drank oil. In June of 2013, the maker added a quart to the official capacity. And then a year and a half later, came the bulletin that halved the interval and replaced a list of parts on cars that were already out of warranty. Now here is the part the showroom never frames this way. The company did not halve that interval because the metal was wrong. It halved it because the long interval was starving the engine, and a shorter interval with the right oil was the actual fix all along. The owner of this V8 did not get a bad engine. He got a brochure interval, and the brochure was selling a feeling, not protecting a motor. And the cooling on these turbo-era BMWs is a recurring spend. The water pump is electric, with a plastic impeller, and it tends to give up somewhere between 70 and 100,000 miles. The thermostat housing and the coolant pipes are plastic, and they go brittle with the heat cycling. There are also the Vanos solenoids that control the valve timing, and they wear, and a wearing one will throw a rough idle and a light that sends a nervous owner straight to the dealer for a guess. None of that is catastrophic, and all of it is a range, not a fixed number, depending on the shop and the region. Set the $200 habit of changing the coolant and watching the pump against the 5-figure repair of an overheated warped head, and the math stops being an argument. I had a man bring me one of these turbo BMWs with a $4,000 dealer quote in his hand and a check engine light he had been told was a major repair. He had every reason to believe the number, it was on letterhead, it was specific, and the car was out of warranty. The fault was a cooling sensor behind a connector that the right tool unplugs in about 11 seconds, and the sensor itself was a part one keep on the shelf for a few dollars. He did not get cheated by a liar, he got handed a menu, and nobody on that drive was paid to tell him the connector was the whole of the job. That is the BMW bill in one story, and it is the reason I am reading you all three of these the slow way. Now the praise, because this make earns it. Before the turbo and the long life sticker arrived together, BMW built a naturally aspirated inline-6, the engine code in a great many cars from 2004 to 2015. It used a magnesium and aluminium composite block, and it is, to my eye and to most of the trade, one of the most durable engines the company ever made. Smooth, simple by the standard of what came after, and its weak points are minor. A Vanos solenoid that wears, a couple of gaskets, the same electric water pump. If you want a BMW that simply runs, you do not buy the newest one. You buy the generation, right before the Turbo 4 and the stretched interval shook hands. That is the whole BMW lesson in one line, and it is going to rhyme with the next two bills. Because the Audi tells the exact same story with a different accent, and its villain has a name the marketing department was proud of. So set the BMW bill down and pick up the Audi. Same shape, different details, and one word on the oil cap that I want you to go check tonight. The worst first again. The 4-cylinder turbo in a great many Audi and Volkswagen cars, the engine family code most owners have never heard, has two famous problems, and they are both fixable if you know them. The early versions, roughly 2008 to 2012, used an early design chain tensioner that can lose its grip. On a cold start, the oil pressure is low, the tensioner has not been fed yet, and you hear that rattle again. The same rattle as the BMW, for the same physical reason, on a completely different badge. In the worst case, the chain jumps and the engine is into the thousands of dollars to put right. Not a fixed 8,000, not a number I will pin to your car, a range, worst case, on a neglected example. The later generation of this same engine fixed the tensioner and the engine got materially better, which is the buy the later generation lesson showing up for the second time in two bills. The second Audi problem is oil consumption, worst on the 2008 to 2011 cars. The root cause is the geometry of the piston rings, the oil control ring, and the little drainback holes that carbon plugs, so oil sits on the cylinder wall and burns off every stroke. Audi's own literature put the acceptable consumption at roughly a quart every 1,000 miles. That is a number I find hard to say with a straight face, but it is theirs. The production tolerances were revised from the middle of 2011 onward. If you are looking at one of these, verify the build date against the VIN, because a later one is a different animal. And then the carbon, which lives on every direct injection engine of this era, every badge, not just this one. Direct injection sprays the fuel straight into the cylinder, so no fuel ever washes the back of the intake valve the way it used to, and carbon builds there. It starts to matter around 60,000 miles. The fix is a cleaning, a walnut blast or a chemical clean on an interval. Now I have to be very plain here, because this is exactly where the bad advice on the internet gets people in real trouble. You clean carbon within the law. You never delete the emissions hardware. Removing or disabling an EGR, a diesel particulate filter, or a catalytic converter is illegal under the Federal Clean Air Act, and the EPA can fine you into the thousands of dollars per violation. Clean it, service it, keep it, never bypass it. That is not me being cautious, that is the law, and it is also better for the engine. There is a reason these engines lasted for the fleet buyer who serviced them on a schedule and quit lasting for the rest of us, and it is not the engineering. It is the next thing on this bill, the one with the proud marketing name, and it is the single most expensive sentence I am going to say in this whole video. So watch the interval, not the warning light. That is where this engine is won or lost. Now the villain with the proud name and the praise that comes with it. The villain is the long life oil service. The interval stretched toward roughly 18,500 miles, or once a year. That interval was built by a marketing and fleet department, not by an engine department, and on a turbocharged, chain-driven, direct injection motor it promotes sludge and wear. Here is the honest nuance, because I will not sell you a panic. Long life is fine, but only on two conditions that almost never both hold in the used market: the exactly correct full specification oil and the interval honored to the day. In the real world, a used car gets whatever was on the bulk drum that week, run 2,000 miles past due, and that is what kills it. The fix is entirely in the owner's hands. A shorter interval with the right oil, and the failure mostly does not arrive. Check the exact approval number on your oil cap against your owner's manual, not just the viscosity, and the praise. The supercharged V6 in the larger Audis from that era, run on a real interval, will go 150 to 200,000 miles, and past it without drama. The engine was never the problem, the sticker on the cap was. So that is 2 bills, 2 makes, the same lesson twice. And now the third bill, the Mercedes, which carries the heaviest figure on my bench, and also the single greatest engine in this whole conversation. The worst first, one last time. This Mercedes bill came off a car from the 2005 to 2007 window with a V6 or a V8 of that era, and the failure is a gear. On the V6 it is the balance shaft gear. On the V8 it is an idler gear. The metal the maker first used was too soft. The gear wears, the engine throws a camshaft correlation fault, and the only fix is to split the engine to reach the part. There was a settlement, with final approval in August of 2015, that extended the coverage to 10 years or 125,000 miles, and reimbursed prior repairs up to $4,000 if they were done outside a Mercedes dealer. And one detail makes this one almost gentle if you know it. The whole risk is decided by a serial number. The bad gears live in a specific serial range, and the maker changed the gear material after it. You can read that serial in about 90 seconds before you buy the car against the VIN and the engine serial, and almost no buyer ever does. The defect is not the trap, not checking is the trap. I have watched a man talk himself out of a perfectly good 2009 car because the bad gear story scared him off the whole make. And I have watched another man buy a 2006 in the bad window without ever lifting the bonnet. Both of them needed the same 90 seconds, and neither one took it. The 7-speed automatic in these cars has a conductor plate in the gearbox that fails, worst on the early 2004 to 2008 units, with harsh or holding shifts. A fluid and conductor plate service before the damage spreads is far cheaper than a full valve body, and you spec the correct Mercedes transmission fluid, and you guessed it, verify it against the manual. The air suspension on the bigger cars, the Airmatic, is a real cost center, the struts and the compressor, and I am going to stop and be very direct about this one. Suspension is load-bearing, it holds the car up, and it affects how the car stops and steers. That is not a driveway job, and it is not a job to learn on. Budget for it, or buy the steel-sprung version of the model, and the actual work goes to a licensed mechanic. I will tell you when a job is yours to do and when it is not, and this is one that is not. And the rust on the cars from the water-based paint era of the late 1990s through the early 2000s is real on the older bodies, though the later galvanized cars from around 2003 onward are a different and much better thing. A later one of these is materially less likely to rot, which is the buy the mature generation lesson for the third time. And if you have stayed with me through 3 bills, line by line, you are already the kind of owner I wrote this next thing for. Everything I have walked you through, I put on paper. Which engines outlive the car, and which ones die on a schedule the trade always knew about. The long life sticker that costs you the gearbox. The cold start, the leak, and the engine code an old hand checks in the first 5 minutes on a used lot. It is a guide called The Ones That Last 500,000 Kilometers. It is $39.99, and it lives at fritz.commonguides.com. If you want the gate-kept fix book and the carbon and DSG book with it, the 3 bundle into the complete German engineering vault for $49.99. That is down from $207, a saving of about $157, 76% off, while the founding price holds. Now set that against the other side of the counter. A dealer charges you $150 to $300 just to plug in the scan tool and read the fault before a single part is touched, and then writes up a $900 job for a fix that was $7 in parts. The whole vault costs less than that one diagnostic fee. The founding price holds through June 20th. There is a 7-day guarantee, so you read it before you decide it earned its keep, and you scan the code on the screen, or you type fritz.commonguides.com. These are researched guides. not a promise about your specific car, so check every interval in them against your own owner's manual before you trust it. That is the only honest way to sell a tool, and that is the tool. Now the praise, and it is the best praise in this entire video. The same company that built that conductor plate also built the 5-cylinder diesels of the 1970s and 80s that are, by reputation and by record, among the most reliable engines ever made by anyone. Mechanical injection, conservative tuning, robust internals, and a simplicity that the modern drivetrain has entirely lost. That is the engine that ran 4.5 million kilometers in the Thessaloniki taxi without being opened. Same badge, the decline you feel when you read the heavy bill is real, but it was never the star on the bonnet. It was the moment the engine got sealed up, the interval got stretched, and the sticker said lifetime, and we were all told that was progress. The metal of the legend and the metal of the warning came out of the same gate. Only the philosophy changed. So now you have heard all 3 bills and you can feel the badge argument coming apart in your hands. Because look at what these 3 bills, read side by side, just told us 3 makes. The same physical rattle on a cold start. For the same reason, on all 3. The same lesson, buy the generation after they fixed it, on all 3. The same villain, a stretched interval and a sealed up proprietary design, on all 3. The decline is not a BMW decline or an Audi decline or a Mercedes decline. It is an era decline, and all 3 makes drove into it together. And that means the question you walked in with, which badge is most reliable, is the wrong question, and I think on some level you already suspected that. It is the question the showroom wants you to argue, because as long as you are arguing crests, you are not asking the one that protects you. Which generation is cheapest to keep alive past 200,000 kilometers, and did the last owner honor the interval or trust the sticker? Every owner who buys on the badge instead of the engine code and the service history is doing one of 2 things. Either buying the wrong car, the first launch year of a new technology, or cooking the right one by trusting a long life interval that was never built to protect it. That is the largest stake in this whole conversation, and it has nothing to do with which logo you prefer. And if you read your own service invoice the slow way, line by line, instead of taking the menu at the counter, then you are already the kind of owner this channel is built for, and the verdict is about to be yours. So put the 3 bills back in front of you, because I told you the verdict was one word, and now I owe it to you. The word is not BMW, it is not Audi, it is not Mercedes, the word is generation. Here is the whole of it. The answer I would stake my own money on, and it works for all 3 makes the same way. You do not buy the badge. You buy the right generation of any of the 3, and then you run it on a real interval with the correct full specification oil and fluid, and you confirm the engine code and the serial by the VIN before the money ever changes hands, the naturally aspirated 6 instead of the early turbo 4, the later generation of that Audi engine instead of the first, the Mercedes built after they fixed the gear with the serial checked instead of the bad window, the galvanized later body instead of the early one. Pick the mature generation, never the launch year, and the single cheapest piece of insurance on any of the 3 is oil and fluid changed on the real interval, not the brochure one. And here is the proof, the thing I keep coming back to, the cleanest evidence in this whole video. The maker itself told you. When BMW shortened that interval by half in 2014, it was not admitting the engine was bad, it was admitting the interval was. The company that built the 4.5 million kilometer taxi and the company that built the conductor plate are the same company on the same badge in different decades. The metal did not decide which car you get, the interval did, and the generation did. And for the first time you can read both before you buy. Picture the owner who did exactly that. He changed the fluid on time, he checked the serial by the VIN, and he is the one picking up the small bill. Now follow that out to its end, because this is the part the whole structure depends on. You never noticing. The long life interval, the proprietary connector that only a dealer tool opens, the diagnostic fee charged before any work begins, the upsell menu, and the throwaway car economy that prices a repair to push you into a new loan instead of a $30 part. Not one of those is a criminal, and I will not name you a villain with a badge on the hood. The mechanic on the floor is honest, the service writer is paid on a menu he did not write, but the whole machine earns more from the gearbox that fails than from the $200 service that would have saved it, and so the truth about the interval is the one thing nobody on that drive is paid to tell you. As long as you are arguing which badge is best, you are arguing the question that costs them nothing. The moment you start asking about the generation and the interval, you stop being the easiest customer on the lot. So what do you actually do with this before your next service or your next used car viewing? 3 things, and they cost almost nothing. Read the exact oil approval number of your filler cap and check it against your manual, not just the viscosity. Find the engine code and the build year for any car you are about to buy, and look up its known weakness and its serial range before you hand over $1. And cut whatever long life interval is on the sticker, and run the correct oil more often than the brochure says. That is most of the protection in this entire video, and none of it needs a dealer. Look at the 3 bills one more time. 2 of them were avoidable. One was a $7 part written up as a $900 job, behind a connector only a dealer tool opens. One was a gearbox that died because a sticker promised the fluid was good for the life of the car, and the fluid was not. The 3rd bill, the small one, came off the car whose owner changed the fluid on a real interval, confirmed the part by the VIN, and never once let the badge do his thinking for him. That is the whole job. Not luck. The boring thing, done on time, by a man who decided to keep his car instead of feeding it to the service drive. So if you read your own service invoice line by line instead of trusting the menu, you already know which of the 3 you would put your own money on. The honest answer is that you would put it on the right generation of whichever one you actually like to drive. The right generation of any of the 3, run on a real interval, outlives the argument you came here to have. Picture that car at 300,000 kilometers. The engine quiet on a cold start, the gearbox still grabbing the next gear on its original actually changed fluid, and no 5-figure quote sitting on anybody's counter. It was always built to go that far. The only question was whether someone serviced it the simple correct on-time way or trusted the sticker. The 3 guides are at fritz.commonguides.com. The founding price holds through June 20th. There is a 7-day guarantee, and you can scan the code on the screen. The next thing worth knowing is the one I held back today. There is a single fix on the BMW bill that is $7 in parts and $900 at the counter, and the only thing standing between those 2 numbers is a connector and a menu price, and that is a video all its own. The badge was never the question, the interval always was.